Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today's webinar is Implementing Accessible Voting in Your State. Jamie, next slide. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speakers for today. This afternoon, Dr. Sachin Dev Pavathran and Amelia Powers Gardner will share their experience implementing accessible voting options and lessons learned during the process. In case you missed it, earlier this month, an announcement was made that the U.S. Access Board named Dr. Sachin Dev Pavathran as its new executive director. Woohoo! Dr. Pavathran was appointed to the Access Board as a public member in 2012 and reappointed to a second term 4 years later. During his tenure, he served terms as chair and as vice chair of the board. In addition, he was active in the Access Board's update of its Section 508 standards for information and communication technology in the federal sector. Dr. Pavathran has served as program director of the Utah Assistive Technology Program and as the director of policy for the Center for Persons with Disabilities at Utah State University since 2011. He has over 20 years' experience developing and testing assistive technology and has lectured and trained extensively on the subject. He is president of the Association of the University Centers on Disabilities National Board and is a member of the National Federation of the Blind, where he chairs the Committee on Autonomous Vehicles and Innovations in Transportation. He was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights Utah Advisory Committee and has represented the Access Board on the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission's Board of Advisors. Amelia Powers Gardner is the Utah County Clerk Auditor. Prior to being elected as the County Clerk Auditor, Amelia was an account executive for Caterpillar for 12 years. Since being elected, Amelia has received national recognition for her election reforms. In addition to being the only county clerk in Utah to administer ranked choice election, she is also the first clerk in the nation to implement mobile voting for overseas, elderly, and disabled voters, and offer end-to-end automated marriage licenses. Amelia continues to receive local and national attention for improving efficiencies and increasing election security, including being featured as one of government technology's top 25 doers, dreamers, and drivers, and earning the Government Blockchain Association 2020 Achievement Award for leadership. In addition to her political work, Amelia manages a small business consulting company. Amelia Powers Gardner is the proud mother of 6 children. She is married to her husband and lives in Pleasant Grove, Utah. Jamie, next slide, please. So, just a few housekeeping reminders before we begin. To see captioning, click on the CC button on the control panel. We will be taking questions throughout. If you have questions or comments, please enter them in the chat window, and then our speakers will stop to answer them as time allows. Please be sure, as always, to check AT3 Center's website for upcoming events. And please take time to complete the post-survey evaluation. A link has been put in the chat window. However, we will also be sending out a message after the event. So without further ado, I would like to turn the mic over to Sachin and Amelia. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for making time to join us today to have this important conversation. I appreciate that ATAP has had multiple conversations around this important topic in the last few months. The voting is a critical right that we all as citizens exercise, and we need to make sure everyone has access to privately and independently cast their ballot. So today we got Amelia Powers, who I think is a rock star election official. I brag about her everywhere I talk because I wish we had Amelia, someone like Amelia all over this country, because that would make a huge difference for, folks like me who are blind, people with disabilities to, independently vote. I'm going to turn the time over to Amelia for most of the comments today, because I want all of you to hear her journey and why why she's been very successful in what she has done in Utah, in the county she represents, because it is something that I think is very doable in every county, every state, if we advocate for it. So with that said, and please do ask questions. We want to make this a conversation, but with that said, I'm going to turn the time over to Amelia.
Thank you, Sachin. As they said, my name is Amelia Powers Gardner, and I'm the Utah County Clerk Auditor. So I know that elections are run a little bit differently everywhere in the country. The county clerk, which is my position in Utah, is the one who's over elections. So I run all of the elections in my county. My county, Utah County, is just south of Salt Lake City, and we have about 680,000 citizens. So about a medium-sized county, definitely not rural, but not quite a big urban center. Of that, we have about 325,000 registered voters. So it's a fairly big area. We have two major universities in my county, which pose several different challenges. We have Brigham Young University as well as Utah Valley University. So it's a very, very unique, forward-thinking area. As we also happen to be one of the youngest counties in the nation, because we have such a high college age population, and then of course the young couples that have kids. So it's very young that way, but people tend to be very, very open to new processes. When I became the county clerk, as I came in, I knew that our elections world was in dire need of reform, but it was a need of reform across the board for all citizens. But I wanted to make sure that every citizen had the opportunity to cast a ballot, and to do so not just barely, but with integrity and with confidence and with knowledge, and independently. So I want to tell you why this is really important to me. I'm the youngest of 5 to a single mom. And my mother was born blind in one eye and half blind in the other eye. She has underdeveloped optic nerves. So a large portion of my life, my mom has had a really hard time seeing. And then when I was in young elementary school, I think first grade, she also became crippled. She spent a lot of my childhood in a wheelchair or on crutches. And in fact, to this day, a lot of the time that she's either in a wheelchair or on crutches. And being a single mom has challenges of its own, but then being a single mom who has some physical limitations, it was very difficult for her to do things that a lot of people took for granted. One of those things was voting. From the time that I could drive, from the time that I turned 16 years old, I was driving my mom to the polls. Because as soon as she had children that could drive, then she was having us drive, because she can only drive during the day and she only drives in areas that she knows well. And anytime she was doing anything outside of her regular routine, she had us drive for her. This really taught me about the independence factor. It's very difficult on my mom, who raised 5 children on her own, put herself through university. It's hard on her to not be able to drive herself at night, because she's such an independent person that she wants to be able to do these things. And she's incredibly politically active. So voting was a really big deal for her. And it really opened my eyes as an election administrator that we have amazing people who have some physical limitations that are really being disenfranchised when it comes to something as fundamental as voting. A lot of election officials in my position, they think if they put an ADA machine at a polling location and make sure that there's a wheelchair ramp available, that they've made voting accessible to everybody. But having this so close to me, I recognized that just having the machine there and putting a wheelchair ramp there doesn't actually make voting accessible for everybody. So I wanted to make sure that every citizen in my county, regardless of their limitations, whether it be PTSD or an underdeveloped optic nerve, that they had the ability to vote and to vote with confidence. To me, it was really about the people, not just the concept. So I've told you a little bit about my mom. She was obviously the big inspiration for me. But as I started going down this path, I found other people. One of them was a lady that I grew up just around the block from. I was really good friends with her grandchildren. And she just recently passed away. She was 107 years old. And last year, when I rolled out mobile voting for people with disabilities, I had the opportunity to go and sit with her in the first election. And this is a woman who, like I said, she was an icon to me growing up, lived to be 107 years old, has something like 85 grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. And she was able to use a mobile device and vote on her own. I mail every active voter in my county a ballot. We are a vote by mail county. And a lot of people think that that means that, oh, well, anybody, if you can't get to the polls or if you have a disability, that means you can vote. But as we went to Maxine's house, her name is Maxine Grimet, as we went to Maxine's house and we handed her the paper that she needed to fill out to be able to utilize mobile voting, she had a hard time holding the pencil or the pen in order to sign that. She had a really hard time signing her name. And that was a really eye-opening moment for me, because this is a woman who was literally born before women had the right to vote in most of the United States. She was born 107 years ago. As you know, for the first 7 years of her life, women didn't even have the franchise of voting. And here we are. A lot of people across the country assume that because they've made a wheelchair ramp available and we mail people a ballot, that we've made voting accessible to her, but it wasn't. Getting to the polling location, even with a wheelchair ramp, is very difficult for her, and she can't even really hold a pen or a pencil to fill out that ballot. So up until the time that we brought mobile voting to my county, she was relying on other people to fill out that ballot for her. She was very much a trailblazer. She was one of the first women to become a supervisor at Brigham Young University here in the county. She was absolutely a trailblazer for women and very independent. Like I said, raised 8 children herself and had 85 grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, and had to ask somebody to fill out her ballot for her, even though I was doing everything that the DOJ says that I'm legally required to do. So I recognized at that point that legal requirements are not sufficient to give every citizen equal access to the ballot. Beyond Maxine, we had just this last election, we ran a 24-hour polling location the night before the election for anybody who maybe works second shift, gets off late, could come, at midnight. If you're immunocompromised and you don't want there to be a line, we ran a 24-hour location, and we had a lady show up. She said, I work at an assisted living facility, and we have an 87-year-old man who just moved into our location last week, and his ballot was sent to his home. So he did not receive his ballot in the mail. And he has voted in every election since he turned 18, and he cannot sleep tonight. It is midnight and he is still awake because he's worried he's not going to be able to vote. Can you help me? And we were able to help her get a ballot to him at midnight so that he could vote, so that he could sleep, knowing that he wasn't going to miss this incredibly important election. We've also had patients that had a kidney transplant, and we couldn't bring them in their mail. We couldn't bring them in a paper ballot. And they obviously couldn't come to the polling location because they just had a kidney transplant. But they still have access to their phone. They're able to sanitize their phone, and they could utilize their phone and still be able to vote. Voting and accessibility, to me, it has transformed from the legal minimum that I'm required to do to really about the individuals and the stories and the people that we're helping. So that's why this is really important to me. It matters because the people matter, and all of the people in my jurisdiction that I serve matter to me. So we've done a handful of things. One of the things that I'm very proud of in my accomplishments in my short 2 years in office is that the ACLU of Utah gave us a 100% rating when it came to voting accessibility. And that wasn't just because of our mobile voting project, which I'll go into a little more detail in a minute, but we've done a lot of things. We have obviously we have our mobile voting project, but we also, on every single publication that we have, we make sure to put somewhere on that publication, if you know someone with a disability, please look into the accommodations we have for those with disabilities. Every website, every ballot insert, every piece of publication that we send out has something about, we have accessible voting if you know anyone who needs that. On top of that, we've made our website completely ADA compliant. We also have our on-site. We do more than just a wheelchair ramp. We try to look at all aspects of the ADA compliance, including the right to privacy, making sure we have enough staff to help anyone that has questions. We obviously have the ADA compliant machines at every polling location. We also offer curbside voting. We issue emergency ballots, and we have gone another step where we try to accommodate caretakers of people with disabilities if we at all can. I recognize that not every person that has a disability is the one who's actually voting. Oftentimes it's their caretaker. Maybe they have a loved one who has a disability, and I want those people to be able to vote as well. So I think next I'll maybe speak a little bit about our mobile voting project. This is the thing that I think is the most exciting and something that I'm definitely a trailblazer on. We have partnered with a company called Voatz, it's VOATZ, to offer people the ability to mark their ballot electronically using their mobile device. And the reason we chose a mobile device is because, having experience with people in my own life that have disabilities, I recognize that people's mobile devices are tailored to their individual needs. Whether you have a disability like my mom that is visual, or whether you have another type of a disability, if it's a hearing issue or even a physical issue, typically your mobile device has been tailored to you, even if it's just that you're the one who set it up so you know where the buttons are and how the things work. The voice to text technology, for example, is going to recognize your speech patterns. And so I wanted people to be able to vote in a way that is most comfortable for them. And I felt that using their own personal device would do that. Voting is not something we do very often. At the max, we do it 3 times a year, but usually only once a year. And for a lot of people, it's only once every other year. And having a person with a disability have to go to the polling location and use the ADA compliant machine, they're not going to remember 2 years from now how that machine works, which means that every election, they're having to ask for help. And I want people to be able to, if they feel comfortable asking for help, fantastic. I will provide somebody there to help them. But a lot of people, sometimes maybe they're shy, maybe they're an introvert, or maybe they just don't want to have to ask for help because they want to be independent. And letting people vote on their own mobile device gives them that independence. So what we've done is we deliver their ballot to them in an electronic form on their phone. They're not actually voting on their phone. What they're doing is they're marking their ballot. We utilize a vendor, Voatz, who has completely integrated with any of the programs that are native on a mobile device for people with disabilities, allowing them to not have to navigate or learn a new system, utilizing the program that is native on their device to mark their ballot. So we go through and we verify the identity of the individual. They get their phone, they enter in their voter information. They do have to opt in. So with the county, they're going to opt in. Now, when it comes to the opt-in, I get asked by a lot of reporters and a lot of people, well, what counts as a disability? I don't want to tell people what counts as a disability. I want to rely on people to tell me that they feel they need to opt in. So I don't feel like it's my place to ask people, what's your disability? Because their disability might be PTSD and they might not want to share that with me. Their disability could be some sort of I have children with autism. Maybe their disability is autism. And I have a son who's incredibly adverse to any sort of a crowd. Even in school, I have to put him in a school that has class sizes of 10 or less, because if we get more than that, he doesn't even have the ability to learn. I don't want people to have to tell me what their disability is. So I rely on people to opt in. And if they opt in, then I'm assuming that they have some sort of an accommodation that they need, and I trust them. So we do an opt-in. When a person opts in, we send them an email and we let them know you have several options on how you're going to vote. You can vote with your phone. You can vote with a mail-in ballot that we mail you, or we can email you a ballot, and you can choose how you fill it out. In most cases, 80-90% of the people that have that choice, they choose to vote using their electronic device. So that's going to be a phone or an iPad or a tablet, some sort of a tablet. And then we send them an email. With the email, there's a link that they can click to download the app. They don't download this app on their device. Their device will ask them to authenticate. So they enter the device, they put in their information, date of birth, name, address, and then this device will check our voter registration database to make sure that they are a registered eligible voter and that they're allowed to utilize the mobile system. Then they take a picture of their government issued ID and they take a selfie using the camera on the device so that we can ensure that they are who they say they are. They set up a PIN or a code, or they can set up, if their device has a biometric screening, whether that's a thumbprint or a facial recognition, they can utilize their devices. Instead of using a PIN, they can utilize that on their device. And then utilizing their voter registration, we identify which ballot is theirs. We deliver them the ballot. They typically have it for about a few weeks. They have a few weeks that they can go through and do any research on any candidates or any issues they want, so they're not pressed to fill this out right there. I know sometimes people show up at the polling location and there's a lot more on the ballot and they realize they have. That causes anxiety for some people. We don't have that issue because they have it for a few weeks. They can research anything they want. When it's time for them, they can go in, mark their ballot choices. It will, utilizing their voice or whatever technology that they need that they've integrated in their phone, mark their ballot, and then they submit their ballot. And then after they submit it, they once again confirm they are who they say they are, either with their 8-digit PIN or their biometric screening. And they submit that ballot to us electronically. On election day, I then open up a virtual lockbox with these ballots in it, and I print off paper ballots that coincide with the choices that these individuals have made. And then I run these ballots through my scanner with every other ballot. And this ensures that people with disabilities know that their ballot is being counted just like everyone else's ballot. And they don't have to worry about maybe being identified as someone who voted this way because their vote was counted differently. Their vote is counted the same way as everyone else's vote. It's just they mark their ballot in a way that works best for them. I was the first place in the country to do this. And I utilized a couple of laws in order to make that happen. So one of the biggest things that I think is important for anyone who wants to advocate for people with disabilities in voting is to not just come out and say, we want people to be able to vote on their phone. Because when you say that, the cybersecurity world gets a lot of warning signals and they'll come in. And we want to do this in a way that is friendly to everybody. So one of the best ways to do this is to pass a law that says people with disabilities have a right to utilize any method available to any voter to vote. So our country has been really good at making accommodations for certain demographics. And that the demographic that has probably the most accommodations are our military members serving overseas. So military members serving overseas, there really isn't a lot of federal election law. Most election laws are local. They're usually state laws. But one of the laws that is a federal election law is that every jurisdiction in the country has to provide any military member serving overseas an electronic ballot. They don't have to make them return the ballot electronically, but they have to provide them with an electronic ballot. And then in, I think, 29 states, every single jurisdiction in those 29 states has to allow military service members to return the ballot electronically. Oftentimes this is done via email. You email them a PDF of their ballot, they print it off, they fill out their ballot, and then they take a picture of it and send a PDF picture back to you. Oftentimes this is how it's done, but I chose to do it utilizing a mobile device. So the biggest way to open this opportunity to people with disabilities all over is to say any method of voting available to any citizen is also available to anyone with a disability. This language written into our law, at this point, we are making sure that people with disabilities have every option available to them without scaring people into thinking that we're going to have masses utilizing e-voting that is going to get hacked by somebody overseas. So it's a really good way to say, look, if we're making an option available to anyone, it should be available to people with disabilities. That's a big one. Another one is ensuring that your state is one that allows electronic ballots. I think only 29 states currently allow the return of an electronic ballot. I think that's something that everyone should be allowed. Like I said, I care about every person in my jurisdiction, and it kind of bugs me that if I have a military member who's serving on in the Navy on a naval ship that's in the middle of the ocean, that they don't get to return their ballot electronically unless I make that an option. In my county, I make sure they can. But for example, the state of Florida doesn't allow the return of electronic ballots. So anyone who's serving in the Navy that's on a naval ship doesn't have the ability to vote in Florida. That's crazy to me. So I think one of the biggest ways is working with coalitions. If we could say, hey, if the people with disabilities, if that community could get together with the veterans or with the active duty military who haven't had an opportunity to vote because there isn't a return of electronic ballots, then we're really advocating together that all people have the ability to have equal access to the ballot. I think that's a big part of that. And really the next big step is making these options available to anyone who feels a need to opt into them. One of the reasons I think that's important is maybe someone doesn't want to, or they don't feel comfortable self-disclosing that they have a disability. Maybe for some reason they don't identify as having a disability, but they do in that they are prevented from being able to vote because of this. So I think having these options available to anyone so that people don't have to come forward and say, hey, I have a disability, can I vote this way? Someone who has an aversion to large crowds, therefore voting at the polling location on election day may not suit them. Maybe they don't realize that that's a disability. It's impacting their ability to perform a daily, not necessarily daily, but a usual function, which is the ability to vote. That, in my mind, qualifies as a disability, but they may not identify as that. And so their access to a ballot is compromised because of this. So I think having these options available to everybody is a big step. However, I don't know if every jurisdiction is going to be able to get there yet. But so it's baby steps, right? Like number one, create coalitions to give access to the ballot to everyone who has a right to vote. And that including electronic ballots. Number two, have your state pass a law. And this is bipartisan. It was passed unanimously in West Virginia recently on the heels of me leading the pack on this. And it was very bipartisan here in the state of Utah to say that all voting methods available to any voter should be available to people with disabilities. These ones are more easy. These are bipartisan. We already have language here in Utah that you can actually copy and paste our language and give it to your state legislator. And state legislators are more likely to run a bill if they know that other states have done similar bills and not had huge unintended consequences. So there's examples in other states that you can take and borrow. Electronic ballots and voting methods, of all voting methods available to people with disabilities are pretty easy. You're going to start coming into more problems when you're looking at expanding this for all voters. And then the last one that I think I might be the only place in the country that's pursuing this right now is I was successful in June in a special session to get a clause written into the Utah state law for 2020 that allowed us to utilize any method available for voting for a person with a disability is also available for their caretaker. So if there is a person with a disability, their caretakers can, in 2020 at least, could be included in utilizing any method available to people with disabilities. I think that's a huge step for two reasons. Number one, because a person with a disability, if they know that the person who helps take care of them is voting in the same way, then they don't feel self-conscious that they're voting in a special way. They're just seeing that this is how we vote. This is how I vote. This is how, maybe it's their spouse, their child, their parent. This is how they vote. So they don't feel like there's something special about how they vote. They just see that this is how their family or them and their caretaker situation is how they vote. The second reason is if that person with a disability happens to need help, they are able to get help from their caretaker, the person they know and that they trust, because that caretaker then has the ability to test the system themselves and cast their own vote and then help the other person if they need help. So that's kind of the broad swath of areas that I wanted to cover. Just a short recap is this is important to me because I've experienced this in my life. And it's not about meeting minimum legal requirements with the DOJ for me. It's about the stories and the people in the county that this impacts. It's not a one-prong approach. Mobile voting is a fantastic, huge leap step towards the future. But in the meantime, it's got to be a holistic approach that includes things on our print, our websites, polling locations, more than one opportunity, whether mobile voting, curbside voting, giving people options. And then lastly is the legislation that gets us there. The legislation will enable your particular election official, the me of your county. The legislation allows us to do it, but I really think what's really going to push election administrators to do this are the stories. If they start seeing the people this impacts, it's not numbers then to them, it's actual names and faces and situations. That's where they're going to start expanding their comfort zones and adopting these technologies. So I wanted to make sure we leave time for Sachin to add anything or for any questions. Sachin, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is, Maria made some great points about, the value of doing some of this work. And a lot of the times why election officials don't entertain some of this conversation is lack of understanding of how it really works and how it can benefit people, within their community. It's really selling it in a way that it makes sense. And also, one of the arguments that often comes up is the whole security piece. And we've heard plenty this election cycle about security, and it's helping understand how some of this is feasible. Having people like Amelia, giving you ideas on how you can present some of this information to your election officials so it can be tried within your state, and using language that has been vetted and passed in other states. So it really makes a huge difference when you can use model states or model counties that has tried and has been successful, because legislators are usually prone to take a chance or listen when there are success stories.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. Um, they like to hear these success stories. They like to see this. Um, Prior to this year, I didn't have legislators that were willing to run bills on mobile voting, but because of the success that we've had in my county, I actually have a bill that has passed through the committees and will go to the House and Senate floors in this next legislative session that starts in mid-January, uh, to expand our mobile voting project to cities, that allow a city in their municipal elections, when there's city elections, city council and mayor races, it would allow them to opt in to utilize this for all citizens, and then be able to take that and allow citizens to opt in so that we can start utilizing this on a more broad scale. Some of the big challenges I've had are absolutely around people questioning the security. And one of the most important things that we to look at is we need to look at security is not in a vacuum. We're going to look at this in relation to other methods. So I get a lot of kickback from a group of researchers at MIT because they are just convinced that this is the most horrible thing in the world to do mobile voting. They think if you can't show up at the polls on election day and use paper and pen, that you shouldn't be voting. But they're not looking at this in context. When I explain to them, there have been dozens, if not hundreds, of election fraud that have been prosecuted and proven using paper at the polls on election day. Okay, this is a fact. An undeniable fact that there are at least dozens, if not hundreds, of proven election fraud at the polls on election day using government issued IDs. So it's not like that's 100% secure and this is insecure, particularly with my overseas and military and disabled voters here in this county. If I'm legally required for them to be able to return a ballot to me electronically, I ask these same researchers, okay, so you're okay with people emailing me from their Yahoo address or their Gmail account? They say, oh my gosh, well, no, that's not secure. Okay, well, what's some more secure? The app that checks the photo ID or the Gmail address? Oh, whoa, the app is more secure. Okay, so it's more secure than how these people are currently voting. This demographic is currently voting. And in fact, it was funny. I literally, I think it was Monday. It was just this week. The weeks all meld together at this point, going through. So I think it was just Monday. I was on a call with some of my state legislators and one of these researchers from MIT. And the researcher from MIT literally said, I guess if you're in a nuclear submarine under the ice caps, then you could return your ballot electronically, but for everyone else, mail works just fine. And I literally said, huh, it does? I wonder if there happens to be anyone on this exact Zoom call who served in the Marine Corps in Fallujah, Iraq in 2008 and voted in the presidential election. Let's see how mail worked for them. To which my chief deputy unmuted his Zoom line and said, he said, yeah, I was serving in the Marine Corps in Fallujah, Iraq in 2008. And I said, oh, who did you vote for in the presidential primary in 2008? He says, I didn't. What do you mean you didn't vote? I never got my ballot. You mean the mail system in Iraq didn't deliver your ballot to you? No. And I seriously looked at the MIT researcher and I said, maybe it doesn't always work like you think it does. And that was just one example that I happened to have. I mean, it was like, there were like 10 people on the Zoom call. And of the 10 people, there literally were 2 of us, because I actually in 2008 was in Canada and I had an absentee ballot and it was vote by mail. And I never got my ballot in the general election. So there's 10 people on the call and 2 of us in the same election year didn't get our ballots by mail. And so when we're looking at security, we have to look at it in context. So the fact of the matter is, the mail system is not reliable in other countries. pretty darn reliable in this country, but in other countries it's not. And so saying, well, this is more secure than email. If you're, for many people, it's more secure than mail. So when security becomes the question isn't, is this 100% secure? The question is this more secure than what we currently have? And then when you add into the context of people with disabilities, the fact that it's not 100% secure does not interfere with the fact that a person with a disability still has a constitutional right to cast a ballot. And just because a researcher at MIT doesn't think it's secure enough does not impugn someone else's constitutional right. And as an elected official, I don't put my hand on a Bible and swear to uphold the opinions of a researcher at MIT. I put my hand on a Bible and swear to uphold the constitutional right of every one of my citizens, regardless of their ability. So that's kind of how you have to approach it. You know, when you get that security question, don't take it at face value. Don't allow their assumption to become reality. You combat that by saying, no, let's look at this in perspective.
Yeah, you know, arguing with those MIT folks and others who are very bent, you know, there's so, and you know, Amelia, just so that you know, Larry Moore did present to this group a few months ago as well. You know, and Larry's good friends with Amelia and I, and you know, the whole concept about how you know, some of these methods is not secure and making it look like nothing but paper will ever be secure, you know, is not an argument that's can be proved at all. It's something that because they are MIT people, a lot of people just buy into it. With that said, I think the best thing you and I can do, you know, as citizens is prove, you know, show examples, show models that it's working in other states, and use that as a way to pitch to lawmakers, to decision makers within your county and your cities and towns, and you know, legislators, to see what's happening. Because once you can give these examples, like what Utah County is doing, what West Virginia is doing, you know, all these different areas, that's where you have something to give, you know, like a model that you can show success.
And my staff and I are more than willing to talk to other election officials, other state legislators. I've spent a lot of time speaking with state elections departments in Ohio and in Illinois and in Nevada, and speaking to state legislators from half a dozen different states. I spoke to the County Clerks Association in Ohio. And if I'm not available, either my elections director or my chief deputy are. We didn't get into this. I didn't get into public service because it pays well, because it doesn't. I got in this to actually make a difference. And if I have the ability to make a difference for more than just the people in my county, I'm absolutely willing to. So if you need help explaining some of these things, we can absolutely help with that.
Should we see whether there's any questions?
Yeah,
I don't know whether you're monitoring the questions or.
Yes,
Hello.
Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
Hello. Hi, Sachin. This is David Shear. I've been monitoring the chat box for you, and there is a question from Kate Bowden. What is the statute number for the law you passed saying people with disabilities should be able to use any method available? I think that's directed to you.
I'm going to text my chief deputy and my elections director real quick, because they usually have this on hand. And if there's anyone else that has questions, I'm going to text them, give me a second, and then hopefully I have an answer back. If not, I will email that to you and you can email that out if I don't get the answer in time. But let's see if I can get that. I'm gonna mute it for a
Any
second.
questions, David, while Amelia's doing that?
Certainly, Sachin. Currently, there are no other questions in the chat. So if anybody would like to ask a question, please feel free to type it into the chat box, and I'll relay it to our panelists.
if they don't reply, I'll actually utilize one of these law books behind me and I'll pull it open and I'll go to the lieutenant governor. This is literally, I think this is what I use. The only time I use these books is when I get asked questions like this. I'm like, I don't know, let me pull out the law book and we'll see.
Yeah, Amelia is definitely, is a trailblazer when it comes to some of the things that has happened here in Utah, and some of the conversation that's happening nationally as well. She used the example of West Virginia. West Virginia is doing a lot in this, and that's coming after the work that Amelia has done.
Yeah.
So Sachin and Amelia, Kate is also asking, did you research other methods such as that offered by Democracy Live?
I did. Well, they're replying back. So the reason I chose to go with votes rather than Democracy Live is because I'm a big fan of blockchain and the immutability of blockchain. And votes, for those that aren't familiar with blockchain, it's a distributed ledger technology, which basically means that any information is recorded in multiple locations. It's recorded in the case of votes, is recorded in 32 different locations. 2 companies, each company has 16 servers, and those servers are spread across 8 different locations, and that information is recorded. And in a blockchain, if any information is changed, it doesn't actually change where it was recorded. It actually records a new block. So that's why it's called a blockchain. They're all chained together. And anytime, so for example, if I voted for Mickey Mouse for president, and someone wanted to change my vote, and they went into the system, when they changed Mickey Mouse to Donald Duck, it literally would create a new block. So I would be able to see that that was changed. And that block would be recorded in 32 different locations. So if you're going to hack in to a system and change a vote, you would have to hack in to 32 locations simultaneously. Plus, I'd still know you did it because I would have a record of the next change. And so Votes was the only company on the market at the time when I started this process in January of 2019 that had a blockchain solution that I could utilize for auditing purposes. And that's why I went with the Votes solution. Okay. My chief deputy is going to email me that in just a second for the code reference. So if anybody else has anything they want to add, let's see.
This is Kim Osha. I just wanted to say, and I'll say it again, but thank you very much. This has been very inspiring. And I want to remind folks that we are recording this and we will be sharing the link. So if I would say recommend sharing a link to this video with elected officials to help spread the word and get this information out would be one way to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, it's, like Amelia said, when she says that she's, she wants to be helpful, she means it, because she's been very helpful to many people in this conversation. I also want to respect that she is extremely busy as well. So,
well, that's why I said if I can't necessarily, then oftentimes someone on my staff can. So if I can't, oftentimes we'll find either my elections director, who by the way has 25 years in elections and has worked at the 2 largest counties in Utah, as well as the lieutenant governor's state elections office. So she's very credible. In fact, when it comes to elections, she's more credible than me. I just happen to be the elected official. She's the one who has all the experience. And then my chief deputy, who he's a tech nerd like me, so he understands this process inside and out. He also happens to have a law degree, so he knows the laws inside and out. So I honestly think of the 3 of us, if you actually get me, you're getting the least qualified person. They tend to be more qualified. So I actually have this, he sent this to me. I'm gonna type it into the chat.
Well, Amelia is doing that. The reason we wanted to have this presentation today is, often we hear about different ways of doing accessible voting. I think it's important to hear from elected officials like Amelia, the process and the methods that they went through, because that's a good way, like I said earlier, to relate to other election officials so they can relate
Right.
how it can be done.
Okay,
can all
so
talk
in the
about
chat, I put in there, it's two, for those that can't see the chat, it's 20A dash, oh, that's supposed to be 3A, not 3Z. I'll retype that. 20A dash 3A dash 201 voting methods. And the best way to look it up online is going to be at le.utah.gov. Okay, so I retyped that. 20A-3A-201 voting methods. And that's the code reference. Let's see. And so here's the section. It's section 1, part D. It says, except for an election conducted entirely by mail under section 20A-7-609.5, a voter may vote as follows. And then it lists, and section D of that says, if the voter is an individual with a disability, by voting remotely via a mechanical ballot or via electronic means, if approved by the election officer. So the county clerk would be the election officer. So it basically just says that a voter with a disability can vote remotely via a mechanical ballot or an electronic means. It's very simple language that's not going to scare anyone, and it is basically at the discretion of the election official. Right. Do I have any other questions? As far as vendors in this space, Democracy Live is a great one. I happen to like Votes. Votes is a great one. I know there's a couple of others that I think probably in the next 4 years, between now and the 2024 presidential election, my guess is you'll see at least a dozen more companies. I probably get solicited minimum once to twice a week by emerging companies who want my advice or to partner with them. So I know there's going to be a lot more options in this space, and I think that's a good thing. We'll have a lot more options, and you'll see some of the cream that will rise to the top over the next 3 to 4 years. I think by 2024, this is a space that at a bare minimum will be serving our military members, our overseas citizens, and our citizens with disabilities across the country.
In closing, one thing I want to say is it's the idea is to have options available. We can't just assume there's only one option that fits everyone, whether you have a disability or not. There might be people with disabilities who doesn't want to do the electronic voting approach, but having the options available, so as someone like myself, if I choose to vote electronically, I can do so. So I don't have to depend on someone to either help me fill out my paper ballot or get to a location where transportation is not available to get me to that location.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, Kim, that's pretty much what we have. Unless Amelia, you have anything else to write?
No, that was
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amelia.
I was gonna say that was everything. That was all that I had. So if anyone else has questions, we can entertain those. Otherwise, you've got my contact information. So if you need help, if I can't help, I'll forward it on to someone who can.
Well, I'm taking one last look. David, does any?
There currently are no more questions in the chat box.
Well, then I'm going to say, on behalf of all of us, a big thank you to Amelia for not only sharing her passion, but her knowledge and her experience providing accessible voting. And a big thank you to Sachin for connecting us with Amelia so that we were able to listen to her today. And again, congratulations to Sachin on his new role as the Executive Director of the U.S. Access Board. And of course, a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. Please be sure to fill out the webinar survey when you receive it or by following the link in the chat box. And also within about a week, we will be putting a recording of this video on our YouTube channel. So for those who missed it, they will be able to see it then. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ken Bucky has left the meeting.